Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace, and we have an amazing show tonight. It's a remix of a couple weeks ago. We couldn't get Chrissie's audio working, and I think I got it working tonight. So fingers crossed that you guys can hear her. I'm going to need some feedback to make sure you can. Housekeeping, go ahead and approve StreamYard so I can see your name if you want me to be able to stream your name and answer questions accordingly. If you like the show and would like to support it as well as me, you can go to my website, sherrypalace.com, and there is a support tab. I actually just redid my website, so I hope you like it. I have included the shows on here and other services that I can offer. But your support means everything and keeps the show going. I am really excited to bring this guest on. So I'm going to bring her on now because we have a big story to tell, and her book comes out next week. So this is pretty cool. We have Chrissie Chevasutt is a husband, father, and former missionary and pastor in the Vineyard church planting movement. Being transgender and shamed as a child sent her into a life of repression, addiction, crime, and drug dealing. She found Jesus while begging and dying on the streets of Delhi, India. Opium addiction and a life of performance to be accepted as male led to 2 breakdowns, and at the age of 55, coming out as a transgender. Her book, Heaven Come Down, the story of a transgender disciple, will be released on June 30th. Welcome, Chrissie.
Thank you for
Talk to me.
Thank you for having me.
I am so glad you're here. Okay, let's check the comments. Can you hear her, everybody? So to talk, Chrissie, let's make sure our audience can hear you.
It's lovely to be with you, and there's nothing I like more than sitting around the fireside and telling stories.
Isn't this great? I know we're in our perspective homes, so it's a lot of make-believe. But we have to pretend that we're sitting around the fire and 2 chicks just chatting. And I want to know all about your story and all about your book that's coming out. Where do you want to start? This is your show tonight.
Well, the first chapter in the book is called In the Beginning. The Genesis story, in the beginning. I grew up in a very rural, isolated community, a tiny little hamlet. So a hamlet in the UK is smaller than a village, and it's designated a hamlet because it doesn't have a church.
Oh, okay.
And there was only a few houses on a little crossroads, and there were very few kids in the village. And the only friends that I had were my next door neighbours, and they were 2 girls, sisters, and one was a year older than me and one was a year younger than me. And they were my best friends. I had an elder sister of about 5 years older than me. And then there were a few boys in the village, a gang of boys. And somebody asked me, when did I first know that I was different or trans? And obviously we didn't, no idea of trans as a child and in an isolated community. But I think the boys...
So you didn't have a term for it? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, this is early 1960s.
Oh, wow.
We didn't have a television, no internet. Our phone number only had 3 digits, and you were by an operator. So if you imagine a phone only having 3 digits, that tells you how many phones there were.
Yeah, but you're not that old. I mean, it sounds pretty ancient, but you're not that old.
No, it's not. But the point is, it was isolated. But the boys knew that I was different because they beat me up and bullied me continually. They'd throw me in the hedge and had great fun bullying me. And they seemed to know that I was different, that I wasn't boyish enough. That I don't know, but they knew. So I really grew up with these 2 girls, playing with them, living with them. And I'd never really... I suppose as a child, you don't register your sex or your gender. You just are. And I just grew up with these girls and didn't think anything different.
And what did the bullying, did your family accept you, or were they aware, or did they kind of know?
Okay, well, it almost spoils the story.
Oh.
It spoils the book, but hey, when I was 4 or 5, I remember the girl, my friends, we were dressing up, and I had on a little nurse's uniform, and I had a little white cap on with a red cross on and some red lipstick. And I ran in to see my dad, absolutely thrilled, because all I ever wanted to be was a nurse and to love people and care people and make people better. And I ran in to see my dad and said, "Hi, Dad." And he just looked at me in horror and froze. And he just shouted at me and said, "Get out. Go and get changed now." And I was devastated. And I ran out the studio and went and got changed, threw the clothes back at my friends. And my dad never mentioned it again. But as a child, I loved my dad to bits. I mean, I must have worshipped him as a child. He was a lovely, lovely man, a really gentle man, a very kind man, and I loved him to bits. And I was devastated, and I realised that what I was doing must have been so wrong, and that caused me, from that age, to repress and suppress who I was, and any expression of femininity, I just hid.
Well,
Yeah, and
especially when you're given that response. If you felt
yeah,
good for the first time and honest, and he responded that way.
yeah, it was an unintentional curse. It was an unintentional binding up of who I was.
Yeah.
The very beginnings of my life.
Sorry, a storm.
Okay, that's going to set my little dog off.
Yeah, all hell is breaking loose outside right now with this massive storm.
Okay.
So let's hope we get through this call without me losing internet. Audience, Tim, Christine, can you hear Chrissy? Can you let me know, or can you hear my dogs that are barking at the thunder right now? I'm imagining, because no one's saying otherwise, that we're good. Okay. So your dad shut you down. What was your mom like?
She wasn't there. Mum left home I don't know when she left home, but I didn't see her. I don't remember being with my mum until almost puberty. She disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So my dad, I orbited my life around Dad. But then, as I grew older, the bullying, the rejection by boys just carried on and on. And when I went to senior school, I was faced with a decision of either, and all my friends were girls, all the way through infant school, junior school. I only had female friends. That was where I belonged. That's where I was natural. That was where I was drawn to. That was where I was happy. But going to senior school, moving from a tiny rural school of just a few kids to a school of over 1,000 children was quite terrifying. And I knew that I couldn't afford to be seen with girls. And so I walked away from my tribe. I walked away from my female family, and I cut myself off from girls totally. And I started to pretend and try and develop a male persona. And I became gradually more aggressive. As I was bullied, I started to respond and fight back. And I gradually became more aggressive, more violent, started to beat other boys up, and just develop a very toxic male persona, even in my teens.
So how did you end up in Delhi?
Well, I ran away from home. My mum came back. I ended up going to live with my mum she had a very unhappy second marriage. I got to the way I dealt with my inner pain, my dissonance of being so, well, basically through puberty, when my body started to masculinize. I got the Adam's apple, my nose seemed to grow massive, my jaw square out, my muscles, my shoulders, and then my body started to develop body hair, and I was actually traumatized by that secondary masculinization of my body. And I started to have suicide attempts from the ages of 9, 10, 11. That's when my body masculinized. I was traumatized by it, didn't know what to do. was miserable, hated my body, hated being feminine, hated having a male body, started suicide attempts. And I was given a bicycle, a racing bicycle, by my mum and my stepdad. And my stepdad was a national level cyclist.
Oh, wow.
And this bicycle, it enabled me to escape. And I used to ride for miles into the countryside. And then because my stepfather raced, I thought, well, I'm going to race. And I became addicted to the endorphins, to the testosterone, to the adrenaline that I got from racing. But also, when I rode my bike, I realized that my inner torment and my inner pain seemed to diminish the more I hurt myself on the bike. And I basically became a self-harmer through the cycling.
Oh, wow.
Addicted to the cycling. I got to top national level as a 16-year-old. I had a horrific bike accident which wiped out my cycling career and just caved in. Just went into despair, all the gender dissonance at the surface, and I ran away from home. I ran up to London and started living in squats, drug addiction, alcohol dependency, became a drug dealer. I ended up on the brink of prostitution and knew that I needed to run away. I knew I needed to start a new life, turn a new page, clean slate, whatever you call it, start a new chapter. And I thought, I'm going to India. I'm going to study Buddhism and yoga. And I ran away to India.
Did things get better or worse for you there?
I loved India. India was terrifying. And yet
I bet.
Life, you see death every day in India in a way that you don't in the Western world. You see beggars who are horrifically maimed. You see children who are begging, who they say have been deliberately maimed. It's brutal, and yet it's beautiful. There's a beauty about India and the people that I loved. So in some ways, it took me outside of myself, and I was absorbed in India, and I wanted to absorb India into me, and so I basically travelled solo. I travelled with the poorest of the poor, and tried to live very simply. But unfortunately, I started doing drugs and I started buying opium, and I became an opium addict.
Anything to numb the pain.
Yeah, totally. But I didn't really know that was what was causing my addiction. I didn't know that was what was causing my addiction to cycling. I didn't know that my gender issues were causing my self-harming on the bike. And yet the pain on the bike, if I hurt myself badly enough on the bike, the pain of my inner issues seemed to subside, the suicidal torment seemed to go away. So it was all unconscious. It was never a conscious, I'm battling with gender identity. And yet I was deeply, deeply unhappy. And at times the feminine side of me would want to run away, break out, to be me, to be feminine. But it just couldn't happen because I was trapped in this machismo, this grade 1 alpha male syndrome that I'd created for myself.
Well, and especially if you didn't have a name for it either at that point.
No, we didn't know. In the 70s, all we had was, you had, in the UK, you had the Encyclopedia Britannica, volumes of books which most families had on their bookshelves, but it didn't tell you anything about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
There was David Bowie, but David Bowie didn't really help me either. He was just gender bender, but it didn't relate to me and my femininity. But in the 70s, when I was in London and I was on the brink of prostitution, the album that was on my deck all the time was Lou Reed's Transformer, and that was the only understanding I had. I was just transvestite and sick. That's all I had. I just thought, I'm just a transvestite, I'm a prostitute, and my life's worth nothing. Such deep self-hatred in me. And so the drug abuse just spiraled out of control. It was self-destruction. I wanted to die.
You said you found Jesus on the streets of Delhi. Was religion a part of your childhood, or was this your first example of it, or representation of it?
No, when mum and dad divorced and separated, I think any faith that they had, any religion that they had, went underground. And my sister and I, grew up in, I would say, a very free, liberal household. Religion really wasn't part of our lives. We did have grandparents who were devout Christians and very beautiful people, but they didn't ram religion down our throats. And I hated church so much that they had to bribe me to go to church with half a crown in old money.
I think a lot of people will resonate with that.
Yeah, and literally, so I was skint most of my life, but I went to church on the big days when they paid me lots of money, and I literally was bribed to go to church. Otherwise, I kicked and screamed and was horrible. So yeah, I hated religion, had no interest in it, didn't grow up with it. Um, but I guess in my teens, listening to you know music, the spiritual influences within music started to wake me up to a spiritual world. Reggae, Rastafari, um, the rock and roll movement of the 70s. It was very spiritual. So I was starting to develop a spiritual interest. So when I went to India, I was interested in Buddha, in following Buddha, and
I
practicing.
love that Bob Marley brought you to spirituality.
Oh yeah,
I love that.
I came to faith through Rastafari, through reggae, through the philosophers of Rastafari. That's what opened me to God. Seeing the Bible from a black point of view. And the amazing thing is, and this is incredible. My stepfather, the only interest he had other than racing bikes was vinyl, was his old record collection, and he had this massive hi-fi system with these huge speakers bigger than me, and he was really into jazz and blues. When I first heard the blues music, the original American early blues, it was like electricity flowing through me. The hairs on my body stood on end. I went all tingly, and I thought, "This is my music.
Oh
This is
wow.
beautiful." And so I started to study the civil rights movement, the roots of slavery, the history of the blues music, and collect blues music. And it was my passion. Um, And I guess that then flowed into when I moved to London. Reggae had just hit the scene, Bob Marley, and all the reggae artists, the prophets, the poets, the Rastas, the dreadlocks. And so I then just moved naturally into Rastafari, smoked loads of spliff, and just soaked up the vibes. So yeah, I'd become spiritual but not religious.
Interesting. So how did you end up at a Vineyard church? The Vineyard churches in the US are evangelical, very structured, very dogmatic. So how did that happen?
Okay, well, I'd had one or two encounters with Christians, and I was more inclined to beat them up than listen to them. I hated
I think a lot of people will resonate with that also.
yeah, I had a very deep repulsion, which I didn't fully understand. Um, anyway, I was begging. I ended up, because of my opium addiction, um, I ended up begging on the streets in Delhi, old Delhi in India. And one night I fell over in the gutter, and I was lying in the gutter, and I knew I was dying. I was living with a gang of young street boys who had taken me into their family, and I was living with them, sleeping on their cardboard boxes every night on the pavement, and they were feeding me the scraps that they could beg and find and steal. And I fell over in the gutter one night, and it was just like an open sewer. It wasn't monsoon season, so it was dry, fortunately. And I was lying amidst all this food waste and dog crap and cow crap, and I was cursing, and bile was coming out of my body, and I was cursing, and I started to curse my family, I started to curse England and the government, the police, I started to curse God, and like a good pagan does, I started to curse the name of Jesus. I
Yeah.
started screaming and ranting against God. I was cursing Jesus. And I didn't have any vision. I didn't have any blinding lights.
I just lost your audio.
I just had
Talk. Oh, there we go. Okay, it's back.
I just had this very simple realization that Jesus was good, that he was pure, that he was innocent, and that they crucified him. And then I saw my whole life, literally, I saw my whole life. And I saw how ugly I'd become, how abusive I'd become, how violent I'd become to women. I was giving drugs to kids. I'd abused every woman that I'd ever been with, not intentionally, but because I was so broken. I wasn't violent to them. I was very loving to them, but because I was so destructive to myself, I was destructive to them. So I was lying there, and I could see my life, and that my life was pretty sick, pretty evil. And I thought, well, actually, if anybody deserves to die, it's me, and here I am dying. And I just saw the beauty of Jesus. When I came round in the morning, I was still lying in the gutter.
Oh, wow.
And a rickshaw walla had put his cycle rickshaw, it's like this tricycle, over the top of me. He pulled it out the way, he lifted me out the gutter, and he motioned for me to stay there. I couldn't have moved anyway, and I was sat on the edge of this gutter. And he came back with a plate of rice and food, and he gave it to me. And he gave me an Indian cigarette, the cheapest cigarettes you can buy in the world. They're just made from leaves. And I just started to weep. And for the first time in my life, I felt like this, I don't know, I just felt like someone was looking after me. Someone was looking down on me. The love that I felt from this simple act of kindness broke me. And in those moments, I think if I've ever heard God speak, I would say I felt God say to me in my heart. It wasn't a voice. It was just a very simple understanding in my heart. And I would paraphrase it something like this. And I guess it was the Holy Spirit speaking to me. It was, go home, love your family, love your friends, and love everybody that I put in your path, because you have never loved anybody in your whole life. You haven't even loved yourself. And that was the beginnings of an encounter with Jesus.
Grace.
And I'm still following him 40 years on.
Sorry, that made me a little bit emotional. Thank you. Yeah. So you were saved by grace in the gutter. Did you know this person? Was he a complete stranger who just swept in?
He was a kid, a complete stranger. And then I carried on wandering the streets of Delhi. I was out of my mind. I'd gone crazy. I'd thrown away my passport, my return ticket, the last traveller's check that I had. I'd thrown them all away. And I just said, whatever's out there, I'm going to die. Come and get me. And some American Peace Corps workers actually picked me up one day.
Oh, wow.
I was in. And they said, right, okay, we're going to buy you dinner. Tell us your story. So I don't think they were Christians. They were just volunteers. I don't even know if the Peace Corps still exists in the USA.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
They put me in a taxi and they said, right, we're paying the fare to the British Embassy. Go to the British Embassy and they will repatriate you. They'll fly you home. I went to the British Embassy in the taxi that they'd paid for. And when I went in, they gave me all these forms to fill in, name, date of birth, gender, address, parents, next of kin, all that. And I just looked at these forms and I tried to hold the pen and I couldn't even write my own name because my motor skills were so shot by the
oh, wow.
by starvation, by addiction. I couldn't even write my own name on a form of paper. I was just shaking. And I ran out in tears, end of the day, and sat outside the gates of the British Embassy. And the Gurkha guards who were there in the guard room, they came out and they gave me some clothes because I was nearly naked. They gave me some food and they gave me some cardboard boxes to sleep on and a blanket. And I went into the embassy the next day and I begged them to phone home to speak to my parents because I couldn't even write my name. I said, look, I'm going to die if you don't help. And so they phoned home, they phoned my father, and they flew me back the same day. I got home and I was wasted. I was sick. I'd lost, I was in I don't know what it is in kilos, but if I weigh 75, 85 kilos now, I probably weighed,
Wow.
50 kilos. I'd lost so much.
Wow.
I was agoraphobic. I was mentally ill, physically and spiritually sick. And I was locked in my own bedroom for several months. Couldn't go out. Couldn't go out. I was having hallucinations, nightmares, as my body was fighting everything. And that was the beginning.
Well, I mean, you had so much healing to do. So much healing. I mean, physically, emotionally, a drug addiction. I couldn't imagine just hiding away in your room for a few months, needing that.
The amazing thing was that before I went to India, one of the guys in my village where I used to go home and deal drugs, just before I left, he'd started going to church. And he gave me a little Gideon's Bible. Do you have Gideon Bibles in the US?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little Gideon's New Testament. It was tiny. It was about that big. It was beautiful tan leather. It was really, really light. It was just the New Testament, and it was on really beautiful paper, like Whistler paper that you roll joints with.
Yeah.
And you know what? I fell in love with Jesus that I saw in the Gospels. I read the Gospel of John over and over and over again. And I saw the women that Jesus spoke to, that he dealt with. I saw him stand between the woman who was guilty of adultery. I saw him stand between her and the crowd of religious bigots who were going to stone her to death. And I didn't relate to Jesus, but I related to the woman.
Yeah,
I related
totally.
to shame. I related to uncleanness, everything. I was her
Yeah.
and she was me. And I saw Jesus through her eyes. And then I read the story of Mary Magdalene at the tomb, and it broke me. It broke me, her devastation, her loss. And I just began to see through these women's eyes the beauty of Jesus. Mary, out of whom he cast 7 evil spirits. I so related to her. And she broke down and she wept at Jesus' feet, and she cleaned his feet with her hair, anointed him with oil. And that's how I feel about Jesus, just like these women. And so my entry into knowing Jesus was through these women, through their eyes. And it was me. I was them, they were me. And that's been my journey, I suppose. It's a love relationship with Jesus.
That's beautiful. I like that. So, Vineyard. How did you end up at Vineyard? Like I said, for the American version of Vineyard, I can't even imagine. It doesn't even compute.
Well, I guess I mean I'm kind of, John Wimber, who was one of the founding, he became the father of the Vineyard movement, really, and he wrote that Everly Brothers song. You've lost that love and feeling, and it's gone. Whoa. And
Yeah.
John came out of the hippie movement. He came out of the California, with all of the guys who got saved in the hippie, the Jesus freak movement.
Yeah.
And his love of music, his down to earthness, his spirit, his spirituality was so casual, so laid back. And the guys, the early men and women who formed the Vineyard, they really were the hippies who got saved. And so I related to the vibe. The early Vineyard days were magical. They were exciting. It was incredible. And when I walked into the Vineyard after years in religious churches, I just knew I'd come home. The worship was free. And we had a couple of students in our church who were writing worship songs which were going global. And this was before we even had the internet. Brenton Brown and Vicky Beeching. Now, Vicky Beeching subsequently came out as lesbian and got slaughtered by the church in America. But those two were in my church. Vicky was in our church, and she was writing just incredibly beautiful love songs to Jesus.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how I ended up in the Vineyard movement. I ended up becoming a pastor.
It's the way it should be. Definitely the way it should be.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a lot of fondness for the Vineyard movement, but they have become very rigid. They are generally homophobic and transphobic in their theology.
Yeah. Now, I mean, like I said, that's definitely my impression of the American Vineyard churches. My mom was a part of it, and it was verging on fanatical.
Yeah.
It was, and not loving in any way, very judgmental.
Yeah, I think I think the church is very autonomous, and you'll find the churches change incredibly from one church to another. So I've been in some churches, Vineyard churches, which have just been, their spirit has been wonderful, and they've really reflected Jesus. But it's a tragedy that the UK churches have really adopted American, US theological stance towards LGBT people.
We have a lot of transphobia here. A lot of governors issuing bathroom bills.
We followed it closely.
Pardon me?
We followed it closely, and many of my friends are.
Are you experiencing that personally now, or do you have more freedom?
No. What happens in the US flows and trickles into here, and it poisons our politics and our religion. So yeah, what you've had in the States has flowed into the UK, affected UK politics, UK legislation against trans people, and certainly affected and stirred up transphobia within the UK church.
For anyone who has followed the show, I've told this story before, but there's been multiple times that I was confused with being trans. And I have been accosted.
That touched me so much when you told that story.
Really? Why?
Yeah. It made my heart ache.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's to be able to, I mean, I wish I hadn't experienced it, obviously. I've been grabbed. I've been in looking for an appendage. I have been, people tried to fight me, and I've been mocked. So while I don't have to deal with that every day, and it was a confusion issue, I have nothing but empathy because I think that all of us in every aspect of our life, our path in life is to accept ourselves. And we all have a hard time doing that. But when you're trans or when you are part of the LGBT community in general, that makes it even harder for you to do so. And I know how I struggle with self-acceptance. And then to add the outside factors in that I have experienced, I will stand with you. I will march with you. I will be with you to stop the pain and to stop the bigotry, because it has to stop.
Yeah.
People are dying, and I'm getting all emotional again. What'd you do to me, Chrissie?
I mean, the statistics don't lie.
Yeah.
40 to 45% of all trans people have attempted suicide at some stage in their lives. And I think to make the good news tangible, and I think that I don't want to leave my story just being a tragedy. Obviously, I met Jesus, but if I can just say that from puberty and pre-puberty, so the ages of 9 and before, I suffered from suicidal ideation. So I was perpetually thinking of how I could kill myself. I didn't want to live. I wanted to die. And it was all because of my gender incongruence, the dissonance between my body and my spirit. And I lived with that until the age of 55. I became churched at the age of 21. And if anything, that intensified the gender dysphoria. It intensified the pain, the dissonance within me. And the suicidal ideation didn't stop. And I had ministry, I had prayer, I had exorcism.
Wow.
But the suicidal ideation never went. And I didn't realize it I didn't know how full of self-hatred I was. I didn't know how full of shame I was. I didn't know how guilty I felt. It was all a subconscious thing. And my whole spirituality as a male was a fig leaf to cover my shame. It was all performance. So, my toxic masculine mask became one of hyper spirituality, super spirituality, not trying to be better than everybody else, but trying to prove I was good to God. Because underneath, I was deeply, deeply ashamed, and the church told me that being trans was a sickness, a perversion, and so on. So when I had my second breakdown at the age of 55, when I came out, when I was honest with my family, my friends, my community, and God, guess what? The suicidal ideation evaporated. It went.
Wow, that's awesome.
The shame went. And I haven't suffered from suicidal ideation since I came out 7 years ago.
That's beautiful.
For the first time in my life, I have joy. 35 years as Christian, I've never known really how to produce the fruit of joy in my life. I couldn't. I was an Eeyore. I was melancholic. I was miserable. I was full of shame. But since coming out, I experienced joy. I've got a peace like I've never had before.
Authenticity.
It's someone said to me in a radio interview the other day, they said, "Oh, well, you told us that your marriage is stronger than it's ever been. Most people who come out as trans lose their marriage, lose their family, lose their work, lose everything. How come, how does your marriage work?" And I said, well, basically, it's just honesty. I'm just being honest. And that's certainly, and I stand before God and I'm honest. And God can work with honesty. He could work.
How long have you been married?
30 years.
Okay. So your marriage happened about halfway through. I'm sorry, you coming out happened about halfway through of your marriage at this point, right?
I came back from India in 1981. I was age 21. And became a stumbling disciple, hated religion, hated Christianity, still do, but was a stumbling disciple of Jesus. And I married my wife 10 years later in 91.
Okay.
And so I'd been churched, done the whole thing, been the pastor for 35 years when I had the second breakdown and came out as trans.
Well, she's one hell of a woman to stand next to you and for it to be stronger. I mean, I think that's what anybody would want in a relationship is honesty, and that's how any relationship is built, whether it be your friend or your life partner. But you both have to be strong enough to do so. And that's beautiful.
It's been tough, unbelievable.
Oh, I'm sure.
But, I think our friendship is deeper, our love is stronger, and I'm able to love her in a way that I never could as an ashamed, guilt-ridden, suicidally ideating male.
Well, and just that you honor her and she honors you, that's love. That's love right there. And I think that I want to touch on one of the misconceptions that is rampant here in the US is that trans people are abusers. And there is one picture that kind of rocked my world. It came out a couple years ago, and it is of this man. He is bald. He is covered in tats. He's hot as hell, I gotta say. Laying there without his shirt on, his pants a little bit unbuttoned, laying back, and he's trans. And if that man walked into my bathroom, I would have a problem with it. I'd be like, what are you doing here? That's wrong. Yet our society asks to do that. And I think that most people, if they understood their confusion, they would realize they have a problem with abusers, not with trans people. Trans people are not abusers, statistically speaking. White, straight, cis males, are the abusers. And I think a lot of fear happens, and these stupid laws that hinder and make people hate themselves even more because of ignorance. Again, it's authenticity. And I think that if there's any problem, it would be that there would be a jealousy because you are authentic. You stand in your own skin, and a lot of people can't.
Yeah, I think the demonization, the vilification, the stigmatizing, demonizing trans people is deliberate, and it's deliberate by the church, and it's deliberate in the political arena. Within the context of church is always the institution, the righteous have always scapegoated a small minority of some kind, because what it does is it elevates their own sense of self-righteousness, their own sense of being the divinely appointed, the divinely sorted, the perfect, saved by grace, yes, but when they can scapegoat the minority, it makes them feel special. It makes them feel sacred. It makes them feel divinely affirmed because they have something to mirror against. This is the ugly, this is the depraved, this is what God isn't and doesn't bless. But we
Pretty
are.
antichrist, though, right?
So it's a deliberate scapegoating, and it's rooted in a very sinful nature. But within the political arena, right-wing politics has always demonized minorities, whether it be refugees, immigrants, Jews, black people, trans people, because it elevates their role as saviors of the people, protectors of the people. That's the quickest route to fascism. So yeah, the demonization of trans people, it's deliberate. It's deliberate within the church. It's deliberate within the political sphere.
Yet it's one of the things that Jesus actually spoke about with the eunuchs, because the eunuchs of the old are the trans of today. And, they focus on abortion and everything like that Jesus didn't even speak of, when Jesus actually spoke of trans people and said, some are born, some are made, some choose to live this way, love them.
Yeah.
I mean, to even argue or to use that just kills me.
Yeah, no, I could give you probably a dozen half-hour, 45-minute talks on the eunuchs without any notes, about the beauty of the story of the eunuchs from the very beginning of the scriptures to the very end. From Deuteronomy 23:1, where it says, "No one who's been emasculated by cutting or crushing can enter the assembly of God's people," through to Isaiah 56, where God says to the eunuchs, let not those, don't complain to me, those of you who say you are a dry tree, that you're impotent, that you are eunuch. Don't complain, because I will give you a name in my temple greater than that of sons and daughters, greater than that of male and female. I will give you a name in my temple for everlasting. So Isaiah he's sending a message to the eunuchs, to those who are somehow othered, somehow rejected, even by the law. He's saying, no, I, God, will give you a name greater than that of sons and daughters, greater than that even of male or female. It's mind-blowing. And that's before you ever get Jesus talking about eunuchs. The amazing thing is about Jesus talking about eunuchs, and I think this, for me, when I read scripture, I'm a very visual person, and I love the storytelling. And I think if you imagine the scene where Jesus is talking about the eunuchs, the Pharisees have come to trip him up, to try and prove that he's a heretic, to try and prove that he's kosher, to try and prove that he's not sound. And they ask him that trick question about divorce, and he throws a real curveball at them. And he starts talking about eunuchs, which is so offensive to those obsessed with purity culture. He starts talking about these deviants. He starts talking about these people who are not allowed into God's assembly. If you imagine the crowd, you've got the disciples, you've got the Pharisees, and you've got a crowd watching on. Just imagine that there was a eunuch at the back of the crowd, frightened of the Pharisees, frightened to be seen. And as Jesus starts to teach on the eunuch, he just motions for his disciples to move out of the way. and he beckons the eunuch forward and asks the eunuch to come and sit down next to him as he's teaching about the eunuchs. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's
In the first
beautiful
place,
too.
the eunuch that the Pharisees, who adhere to the law, want to separate. And then you move to the Ethiopian eunuch being baptized, and the church, the Jewish church, they were still struggling with circumcision. They were saying, no, we need to get these Gentiles circumcised. Philip comes back and says, oh, I've just baptized an Ethiopian eunuch. You what?
Heretic.
The Holy Spirit says,
Yeah.
come on in, baby. I love you. You're welcome in my body. You're welcome in with my people. The law is washed away, not even in the blood of Jesus. The law is washed away in the baptism of the Ethiopian eunuch. It's rendered as nothing.
So when I was doing research, I understood that the eunuchs were used throughout the biblical Old Testament times because men knew they weren't going to mess with their wives. They were trusted in the Old Testament times as religious leaders, as help servants in the home, all of those things, because men didn't have to worry about anything. And of course, it's all, self-absorbed narcissistic crap. But I mean, back in those times, it was okay. And then all of a sudden we become into a purity issue again.
No, well, actually, I'm going to throw a curveball at you, because in researching the eunuchs, you can go back to the Persian Empire, but you can also move forward to the Mughal Empire in India in the 16th, 17th centuries.
Okay.
And there was a very famous recorded incident of a eunuch who was having affairs with the king's concubines.
Oh.
Now, when you research eunuchs through history, you can go back to the 16th century in Europe. And not many people know this, but the Roman Catholic Church made eunuchs on an industrial scale, because in the 1500s, the Pope decreed that women couldn't sing in public, that they couldn't speak in public because of the New Testament letters. Women must be silent.
Mm-hmm.
So he decreed women couldn't sing in the church, they couldn't speak in the church. All of a sudden, there were no sopranos for the Vatican choir, there were no sopranos for the churches. So they resorted to the ancient practice of castrating young boys to create castrati, or the castrati voice. And they reckon up to 4,000 boys a year were castrated to create voices for the Roman Catholic Church. And this went on until I think there's a recording of a castrati singing, which is actually available on YouTube, from about 1950. The last eunuchs were probably made at the beginning of the 19th century. But anyway, in the diaries...
You just blew my mind. Did anybody who's watching this and anybody else know this? I've seen the documentaries on the choir boys and how they age out. They just stopped aging them out and just started castrating them?
Yeah. Well, okay. So you may have heard of...
Oh my God!
Casanova, a famous European who wrote extensive diaries, and he was he was a playboy, he was a lover, he was he played fast and loose. But he wrote diaries, and he wrote about the castrati. There was another English guy in the 16th, 17th century who wrote about the castrati, and they were famous, and the English women chased them. They loved them. And the castrati were surrounded by innuendo, they were surrounded by scandal, and it was believed that many of them had affairs with the English women. Now, going back to the Mughal Empire in 16th, 17th century, there was a famous case where all the concubines protested against the king because the king had killed a eunuch who had been having affairs with the concubines. Now, one set of teaching says that the eunuchs were used because they were impotent and therefore they could be trusted.
Mm-hmm. That's what I learned.
Yeah, they were impotent, but they definitely weren't celibate. You can still be sexually active as a eunuch.
Of course.
And of course, there's no evidence because they can't get the women pregnant. So the women could have sex and affairs with the eunuchs with no consequences.
Wow.
And no other male was allowed into the king's concubine. And some of these harems could have hundreds of women in them. The king's mother, the king's family, the king's sister, his siblings, his lovers, his concubines, all the people who looked after them. But the only man who was allowed into the harem was the king himself. And the only people who controlled the harem was the eunuchs. That's how much trust that they had.
Yeah, I knew that, which I thought was like, so why are we here now? Why are they the least trusted bunch? So it's because of stupidity.
Yeah, but the eunuchs, and even thinking in the biblical times with the Pharisees, the eunuchs would have been surrounded by scandal. They were considered unclean. They were considered licentious, scandalous. And the whole issue of them being celibate it's one theory, but it's not an accurate one, because there's so much scandal surrounding the eunuchs, and the fact that they had free access to all these women. I mean, there's a story from the Mogul courts where they banned cucumbers and courgettes from the.
Say that again.
They
banned what?
They banned zucchini and cucumbers from
Oh, wow.
The eunuchs had free access. So what do you think?
Wow.
You can still keep a woman happy without having your tackle.
Well, I mean, I've always had my doubts about Solomon, right? 700 and 300 women. How is he working this out? So, yeah, there had to have been some. That's funny.
Yeah, there you go.
Michelle, okay, so evidently I'm the dumb one here because I never knew about this castration, and I am absolutely horrified. I thought circumcision was horrific enough, let alone to castrate young boys so they can sing. That's gross. That's going to take me a while to get around that. Want to show some comments. Demonizing is the red herring designed to distract from the real evil, which is usually in the church, which is usually molestation and all of those types of things added onto it. Again, straight white males, not trans, not LGBT people, statistically speaking. And Christine had a question. Did your wife have any idea before you came out?
Yes, when we first met, we'd both had very unhappy childhoods with broken family, and we were both damaged. We were both carrying a lot of baggage, and we knew the only way that we could move forward in a relationship was by being totally honest. And so I told my wife very early on that I struggled with the trans thing. I didn't know, we didn't have the word transgender then, but I said I've struggled with transvestite issues. I believe it's a sin. I believe God's healing me. And so we went into marriage, she knowing that I'd had a past. But really, as a Christian, with the ministry that I'd been given, I just repressed and suppressed it and buried it. And then it exploded in our faces, because I was basically a walking time bomb. I was a volcano, and every now and then my anger and hatred would erupt. And it was all self-hatred rooted in my trans issues. So yeah, she tiptoed around me for 25 years, sadly.
I equate things like that is like having a 300-pound boulder on your shoulder. And there are days that you forget it's there. There's days that it doesn't seem like it's 300 pounds, but then something will happen and you feel how heavy that 300 pounds is. Some days you can get through it and other days you just can't.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I would have a month every night where I would have battling suicidal ideation, and I knew it was because I had some kind of gender issue. I was suicidal, so trying to be a dad, trying to be a parent, trying to go to work when you haven't slept, when you're stressed out of your mind, that you're full of sin.
Yeah,
you got gender issues. Yeah, I was very, very volatile. So much pain in me.
Well, and the shame will kill anybody. The amount of shame that is put on people. That's what really hurts, when you don't even feel worthy. So we are at the top of the hour. I cannot even believe we went this quickly. I could spend, well, you know what? We're going to go into the VIP. By the way, everybody, it is after midnight where Chrissie is in the UK. This is her girls' night out. we're getting wild in the middle of the night. So I want you all to know how amazing she is just for showing up and being here at this hour. One of the things I did for you, which I want to make sure I post, because I kind of hope that a lot of people couldn't hear everything you said, so they have to buy your book. It's coming out next week. Heaven Come Down, A Story of a Transgender Disciple. Where can they get it? Can they get it on Amazon next week?
You can buy it on Amazon, but I'd rather you buy it through your local bookshop, order it, or through Darton and Todd, which is the publisher. Darton, Longman and Todd. They have a website. You can order direct from them.
Say that again, so I'll type it out.
Yeah, Darton, Longman and Todd.
D-A-R or L?
D-A-R-T-O-N, Darton, Longman and Todd. It's the publisher.
Darton Longman.
Darton, Longman and Todd.
I can't hear that last word.
Todd. T-O-D-D.
Oh. Okay. And that's the publisher?
Yeah. Or you can get in touch with me through Facebook, Messenger.
That?
And by direct.
Okay. Oh, good. Yay. What's your website? Can they buy it through your website?
I haven't got a website, but you can get in touch with me through Facebook or through
Messenger. I saw that box of books that you just got, so I'm sure you're going to be signing some and sending one off. I need to get one. I need to read this book. Your story has intrigued me and it broke me, and I want to feel all of those when I read it. Before we go over to the VIP and continue this conversation, do you have any final words?
No, I just want to say thank you for listening. It's been a very random, all over the place conversation, but it's just fast chat.
Yeah, I love it. I want to have you on again. I'm going to send you a microphone somehow. But yeah, let everybody go find Chrissie and buy her book. And she's not going to be able to stay long in the VIP because it's almost 1 a.m. for her. But come over and ask some questions. Any final words before I boot you to the back?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Thanks again. I love you, and you were wonderful. I'll see you in the VIP. Oh, that was great. By the comments, you guys appreciated it as much as I did. I've been emotional, so sorry for that, and need to toughen myself up. But with stories that are so heartwarming, I just couldn't. And she melts my heart. So I hope that you were able to listen and go buy her book. I'm still working out next week's show, so I don't really have an announcement as to what that is. Trying to find one more guest. But thank you so much for your support. Please go and support the show at sherrypalace.com and do the support button as low as $3 a month. It really helps me out if it doesn't break you. Another way that you can support me is hit like or subscribe on YouTube and tell your friends all about the show. Have them come watch it with you. Have a watch party or something like that. That would be too cool. But I will keep you posted, and I should be able to post tomorrow about what the show is next week. You guys are wonderful. I'm going to say goodbye. I'll see you next week and love you. Talk to you soon. Bye.